Chris Butt is 5th. Todd is P3. YH8 Racing is P4. Chris Butt is P5. YH8 Racing is P4. The qualification session is at RT Bathurst. That Canadian guy is 20th. The race dictator is P2. Jason Short from New Zealand is 1st. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is 3rd. The race dictator is P2. YH8 Racing is 3rd. That Canadian guy is P5. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt from New Zealand is 4th. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is 2nd. The race dictator is P1 up 0.47. YH8 Racing is second up 4.91. YH8 Racing improved his first with a 2:19.437. That Canadian guy is P4. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P6 up 12.20. The race dictator is P3 up 0.75. Best lap is a 2:19.770. 2.461 off pole. Five minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 2:18.325. That Canadian guy is P1. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 2:15.979. Jason Short is P5 driving a McLaren. Jason Short improved his second with a 2:18.282. 2.303 off pole. Johnny Prince is sixth up 13.08. Todd from New Zealand is P7 up 2.69. race dictator is P3 up 1.06. Todd is 7th. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is 4th. YH8 Racing improved is 2nd with a 2:17.622. 1.643 off pole. Chris Bunnett is 5th up 2.31. Best lap is a 2:22.577. 6.598 off pole. Chris Bunnett improved his P5 with a 2:20.006. 4.027 off pole. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 6th up 1.07. Johnny Prince improved his 6th with a 2:23.258. 7.279 off pole. Todd is P7 up 0.61. Todd improved his 5th with a 2:18.635. 2.656 off pole. The qualifying session is now in overtime. Johnny Prince is 7th up 0.35. Johnny Prince improved his P7 with a 2:23.098. 7.119 off pole. Todd is 5th up 0.94. Todd improved his P2 with a 2:17.338. 1.359 off pole. The race dictator is 5th up 0.60 driving a McLaren. race dictator improved is fourth with a 2:17.674. 1.695 off pole. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 2:15.886. Broadcast bot is 18th. The race session is at RT Bathurst. That Canadian guy is P1. Todd from New Zealand is P2. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P3. The race dictator is P4. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P5. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Todd is second. The race dictator is P2. YH8 Racing is P3. The race dictator is P2. YH8 Racing is third. Todd is P4. The race dictator is P2. Todd is P4, 0.4 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is second, 1.5 behind that Canadian guy. Todd is fourth, 2.0 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is P2 driving a McLaren, 1.8 behind that Canadian guy. Todd is 4th, 2.4 behind YH8 Racing. Todd is now P3. Jason Short entering the pits is P9. Todd is now P5. Illis exiting pits. Todd is now 5th. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 2nd, 0.1 ahead of that Canadian guy. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 6th. Illis from New Zealand is 7th. Jason Short from New Zealand is 8th. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Todd from New Zealand is P2. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P3. The Race Dictator is P4. YH8 Racing is 3rd. The Race Dictator is P4. YH8 Racing is 3rd. The Race Dictator is 4th. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is 3rd, 1.0 behind Todd. The Race Dictator is 4th. Johnny Prince is P8 driving a McLaren, 1.3 behind Chris Budd. The Race Dictator is P4, 0.5 behind YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.4 behind Chris Budd. The Race Dictator is 4th, 0.4 behind YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.0 behind Chris Bud. The Race Dictator is P4, 0.9 behind YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.9 behind Chris Bud. The Race Dictator is P4 driving a McLaren, 0.9 behind YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince on lap 2 is 8, 1.6 behind Chris Bud. 15 minutes remaining in the session. The Race Dictator is P4. Best lap is a 2:20.020, 2.428 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince is P8, 2.4 behind Chris Bud. The Race Dictator on lap 3 is P4, 0.5 behind YH8 Racing. Jason Short is 5th, 1.4 behind the Race Dictator. Jason Short was 1.2 faster last lap. The Race Dictator is 4th. The Race Dictator passed YH8 Racing for P3. YH8 Racing is 4th, 0.3 behind the Race Dictator. Jason Short is P5, 0.7 behind YH8 Racing. Jason Short passed YH8 Racing for 4th. YH8 Racing on lap 3 is 5th, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short was 0.7 faster last lap. The Race Dictator is P3, 2.4 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is 5th, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Jason Short was 3.8 faster last lap. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.8 behind Chris Bud. YH8 Racing is P5, 0.9 behind Jason Short. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.0 behind Chris Bud. Jason Short is P5, 0.2 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is third, driving a McLaren, 2.0 behind Todd. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 8th, 2.4 behind Chris Budd. The race dictator on lap 5 is 3rd, 2.1 behind Todd. "10 minutes remaining in the session. Johnny Prince is P8, driving a McLaren, 2.4 behind Chris Budd. YH8 Racing is P4. Best lap is a 2:19.57. 2.283 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince is P8, driving a McLaren, 2.2 behind Chris Budd. YH8 Racing is P4, 1.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 1.9 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is P4. Johnny Prince is 8th. YH8 Racing is 4th, 2.3 behind the race dictator. Jason Short is P5. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P4, 2.5 behind the race dictator. Jason Short is P5. Best lap is a 2:18.730. 1.435 off the fastest lap. The race dictator is P3, 4.2 behind Todd. Todd was 3.4 faster last lap. Jason Short is P5. The race dictator is third, 3.6 behind Todd. The race dictator was 1.2 faster last lap. Jason Short is P5. Best lap is a 2:18.552. 1.793 off the fastest lap. Five minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is third, 2.6 behind Todd. Jason Short is P5, 1.9 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is third, 2.5 behind Todd. Jason Short is P5, 1.8 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is P3. Best lap is a 2:16.913. 0.188 off the fastest lap. Jason Short is P5, 1.0 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is third, 1.9 behind Todd. Jason Short is P5, 1.6 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is P3, 0.4 behind Todd. Jason Short is P5, 1.2 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is third, 0.8 behind Todd. Jason Short is fifth, 1.4 behind YH8 Racing. Todd is third, 5.0 ahead of YH8 Racing. Jason Short is P5, 1.7 behind YH8 Racing. Todd from New Zealand is P3, 3.6 behind the race dictator. Jason Short on lap 9 is 5th, 1.3 behind YH8 Racing. Todd is P3 driving a McLaren, 3.5 behind the race dictator. The leader has just finished the race. That Canadian guy finished P1. The race dictator finished second. Todd finished P3. Jason Short finished fourth. YH8 Racing finished P5. Chris Butt is sixth. Chris Butt from New Zealand finished P6. Illis finished 7th. Johnny Prince finished 8th. Jason Short from New Zealand is 9th. Broadcast Bot is P10. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Illis from New Zealand is P1. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P2. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P3. Todd from New Zealand is P4. The Race Dictator is 5th. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. The Race Dictator is now P3. The Race Dictator is now 4th. YH8 Racing is 2nd. Todd is 3rd. Todd passed YH8 Racing for P2. YH8 Racing is 3rd. Todd is 2nd. YH8 Racing is 3rd. Todd is P2. YH8 Racing is P3. Todd is 2nd driving a McLaren, 0.3 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is 3rd, 0.5 behind Todd. Todd is 2nd, 0.5 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is 3rd, 0.6 behind Todd. Todd is 2nd, 0.5 behind Chris Butt. The Race Dictator is P4 driving a McLaren, 0.5 behind YH8 Racing. Todd on lap 2 is 2nd, 0.7 behind Chris Butt. Todd passed Chris Butt for P1. Chris Butt is P3 battling YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is P2, 0.1 ahead of Chris Butt. YH8 Racing lost 2nd to Chris Butt. Chris Butt is 2nd, 0.2 ahead of YH8 Racing. Chris Butt lost P4 to Illisp. YH8 Racing is P5 driving a McLaren, 0.3 ahead of Illis. That Canadian guy is fourth battling Jason Short. 15 minutes remaining in the session. YH8 Racing is P4, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P5, 0.1 ahead of Johnny Prince. YH8 Racing on lap 3 is P4, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P6, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince was 2.8 faster last lap. YH8 Racing is P4 driving a McLaren, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Chris Budd is P6, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P2, 1.0 behind Todd. Chris Budd on lap 3 is P6, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is fourth, 1.4 behind Jason Short. Chris Budd on lap 4 is sixth, 1.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P2, 1.0 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is fourth, 1.0 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.8 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is P4, 1.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P2, 0.6 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is P4 driving a McLaren, 2.0 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P2, 0.9 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 5th, 2.6 ahead of Chris Butt. 10 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator on lap 5 is 2nd, 0.7 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 5th driving a McLaren, 1.7 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator on lap 5 is P2, 1.0 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is P4, 0.9 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is P5, 0.9 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is P2, 1.0 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is 4th, 0.7 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is P5, 0.9 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator on lap 6 is P2, 0.6 behind Todd. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P4, 0.6 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is 2nd, 0.3 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 5th, 0.2 behind YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is P5, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince is P8, 1.0 behind Chris Butt. Johnny Prince passed Chris Butt for P7. YH8 Racing is 5th, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. Todd is 2nd, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Todd passed the race dictator for P1. YH8 Racing on lap 7 is 5th, 0.9 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P2 driving a McLaren, 0.1 behind Todd. YH8 Racing is 5th driving a McLaren, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. Five minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is P2, 0.3 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 4th. Best lap is a 2:16.917. The race dictator is P2, 1.4 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is P4, 1.0 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is 2nd, 1.5 behind Todd. Todd was 1.1 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is 4th, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P2, 2.1 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 4th, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P2, 1.5 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 4th, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is 2nd. Best lap is a 2:17.448. 0.906 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy is 4th, 0.1 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy was 0.7 faster last lap. The race dictator is 2nd, 0.5 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is P4, 0.4 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P2, 0.3 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is P4, 0.5 behind Jason Short. race dictator is second, 0.9 behind Todd. The race dictator was 0.9 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is P4, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Chris Budd is 8th, 0.9 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short from New Zealand is 3rd, 1.2 behind the race dictator. The leader has just finished the race. Todd finished P1. The race dictator finished 2nd. Jason Short finished P3. That Canadian guy finished P4. YH8 Racing finished P5. Johnny Prince passed Illis for 6th. Johnny Prince finished 6th. Chris Budd passed Illis for P7. Illis finished P7. Chris Budd finished 8th. Broadcast bot is P9.